personally, I found that the 80-20 rule is particularly relevant for the IB, because the difference between getting a 3 and a 5 is so much less than the difference between a 5 and a 7. So this is where you really need to focus on your goal of doing the IB. Are you just trying to do the best you can? Are you trying to go for a 7 every single subject? For example, if you're sitting at a high 5 for a subject, it might be a good idea to spend more time studying for that particular subject to see if you can get a 6, rather than spending time focusing on a subject where you're on a low 6, because the difference between a 6 and a 7 is so much bigger than a 5 and a 6. So if you're short on time, work on the subjects that you're performing the worst in, as well as the subjects that you're close to the next band in. So I talked about that 80-20 rule, and basically it shows that for 20% of the effort, you can get 80% of the results. But what is that 20% of your time, and what should you be spending your time on? Long story short, it's doing the hardest questions you can find. And whether that is being a tutor for your classmates and for your peers, or whether that's making a list of the hardest past paper questions you've encountered, you want to make sure your brain works hard when you're doing past paper questions. But also, every subject is different. For example, for physics, where the majority of the syllabus is examined in every single exam, it's really useful to go through past papers so you can see how they examine each subject and which topics occur the most frequently. So for similar subjects, they want to be incredibly useful to be doing past paper questions as much as you can. And this also includes the sample exams, which you can find on ExamSnap really easily. Meanwhile, for subjects where only a small portion of the syllabus is examined in every exam, then it'd be much more useful to doing all the textbook questions as well as the list of syllabus questions we made earlier. Put it this way, if they've already gone in detail into one singular syllabus dot point in the past paper, then why would they do it again? So of course you have to study for every single aspect of the syllabus, but study all other aspects in detail, and the ones that have already been covered, still study them, but not to the same extent because they're much less likely to appear. For example, for geography, the essay-based questions normally revolve around a particular case study. And when there's only about 20 different case studies for the option and core topics I studied, and they've already examined 8 of them, I realized, wait a second, what if I just studied in detail those 12 case studies that they haven't covered, so that I can memorize the facts and figures for each one of those 12, and only know the other 8 enough to be able to talk about them in an essay, but not having the knowledge to memorize facts and figures for each one of those. That way I spent less time studying because I only had to memorize 12 out of the 20 different case studies, but that way it was also more effective because they were much more likely to appear than the other 8. Next, you can basically nail the IB without making any notes and only having access to this one single document, and that is the mark scheme for each one of the past paper exams. The mark schemes literally tell you what gets you a mark, and this is exactly what is given to the IB markers, so why would you not make full use of it? What more could you ask for? It is literally telling you what you need to get a mark. When you read through the mark schemes, see if there's any words or vocab that appear more frequently than others, and highlight these and utilize these in your essays or responses. For example, for English, there were a few techniques that only appeared in the highest mark bands and didn't appear in the lower mark bands, so I made sure to incorporate them in my final exam. For essays, you can also see how they approach a particular question and whether they tend to see it from one perspective compared to another. For example, I found that for geography, a variation of timescales, for example long and short-term impacts, as well as the powers, for example a high-income country compared to a low-income country, and different perspectives, for example that of a government leader compared to that of a normal resident, were seen in every single one of the mark schemes for every essay. I personally did not think about this when I was first doing past paper questions, so being able to look at the mark scheme and seeing which topics and which words appear the most frequently are incredibly useful because you can implement that in your responses. You also want to make sure that through all the mark schemes, you look at the difference between the top band and the second highest band, because normally these differences may be very, very subtle. For example, for language B, it's only the use of idiomatic expressions that gets you to the highest band. But for geography and for other subjects, it's not as clear, so you want to make sure that you look at it in detail to see exactly what the difference is between the top band and the second highest band. Lastly, exam results are incredibly important, and you can use them to leverage how much time you spend studying every single topic for the different subjects. For example, for physics, our teacher gave us a document where you have to write down every single question we got wrong, why we got it wrong, whether we understood why we got it wrong or whether we had no idea, and what you can do to improve next time. I found this incredibly useful because this way I could see the difference between silly mistakes that I made and mistakes where I genuinely had no clue what the answer was. And sometimes you can often see a recurring theme when you get the answers wrong, whether it's because it's your wording or if you got a definition or whatever it is. It's incredibly useful to see why you got questions wrong. Finally, with these questions you've gotten wrong, make sure you add them to the hard questions list. That way you're sure that you actually understand this topic in detail a few months later or a few weeks after you do the exam. Because otherwise, you might see that you got the answer wrong, look at the answer and be like, oh yeah, I would have done that. But then really, when you do it 2 weeks later and you forgot what the answer was, you have no clue how to do it. So make sure you add these questions you got wrong to the hard questions list so you can revisit them later.